good night of basketball. Hello, Jason Tatum. He had his third career 40-point game on Monday. We heard Tim Legler say it too. Jason Tatum, a budding superstar for the Boston Celtics. And again, Legs made a great point, Kevin. A very, probably different approach by the Celtics towards the Miami Heat this time after they lost to them in the Eastern Conference Finals in Orlando.
Yeah, you can't say revenge so much because it's a regular season game, but a different mindset too. And Jaylen Brown's been fantastic so far.
Tyler Herro's not going to surprise anybody this time, right?
He is not. Well, we got Stephen A. Smith next.
SportsCenter next with Stephen A. And enjoy basketball tonight. Steve Martin.
Welcome to SportsCenter with Stephen A. Smith, presented by Mountain Dew.
Welcome to SportsCenter. I'm Stephen A. Smith. We'll get to the night in the NBA shortly, but first, the reaction to the events that are happening in our nation's capital. Pro-President Trump supporters staged protests at the U.S. Capitol that turned violent. Police officers and emergency personnel rushed in as a lockdown was forced with members of Congress inside. The protesters, some wearing body armor, made their way up the steps around 2:15 p.m. Eastern Time, pushing through barricades with chants of, "We took the Capitol." A woman was shot inside the Capitol and rushed to the hospital, where she died, sources told ABC News. Here's reaction from around the NBA on today's events.
What it's not is I keep hearing this attack on democracy. It's not. Democracy will prevail. It always does.
It's America's capital. Should not be able to do what I saw on video. It's disgusting. It's embarrassing. And it should never happen.
I'll say it because I don't think a lot of people want to. Could you imagine today if those were all black people storming the Capitol? And what would have happened, so that to me is a picture that's worth 1,000 words for all of us to see, and probably something for us to reckon with again. No police dogs turn on people, no billy clubs hitting people, people peacefully being escorted out of the Capitol. So it shows that you can disperse a crowd peacefully, I guess.
We now welcome in Israel Gutierrez, our sideline reporter in Miami tonight. Izzy, what are the players and coaches at the arena tonight saying about the events in D.C. today?
Well, having talked to Eric Spoelstra before the game, he was just basically saying he couldn't believe what they were watching. He couldn't believe what they were seeing. He said his team and he have had some conversations, nothing formal just yet. Right now, Stephen A., there's nobody on the floor for either team. The lights are dimmed. There was some discussion about maybe the Celtics left the floor a little bit early. So far, there's no word on any sort of protest or whether or not the Celtics plan on not playing today's game. But, Stephen A., if you look at these rosters and you look at these players, Jaylen Brown was one of the players who immediately after the George Floyd situation drove 15 hours and started protesting himself. You're talking about a Miami Heat franchise that has spoken up dating back to Trayvon Martin. So while there is nothing planned and nothing formal announced by either of these two teams, there might be something coming up. We'll just have to wait and see.
Celtics and Heat at the bottom of the hour on ESPN. Izzy, thanks so much. Really appreciate it. Several players took to Twitter as the events in D.C. were occurring. Trae Young said this is crazy right now. Kevin Love tweeted, an absolute disgrace what's happening at the U.S. Capitol right now, and a blatant example of inequity in how law enforcement chooses to deal with those involved. And Jamal Murray of the Denver Nuggets, 2021 feels like the second half of 2020 already. We now go to San Francisco, where our very own Malika Andrews is our reporter for Game 2 of our doubleheader tonight between the Clippers and the Warriors. Malika, what are the players and coaches at your game saying about the events in D.C. today?
Well, everybody that I've been talking to, from players, coaches, front office folks, Stephen A., has been keeping one eye on what's going on Capitol Hill. They have been frustrated. They've been saddened. I've heard over and over again that players telling me that they're not surprised. There has been a sentiment that I've heard over and over that we just heard from Doc Rivers, where players can't help but notice the difference between the way Black Lives Matter protesters, some of the Black Lives Matter protests that they participated in over the summer and in the spring, how those people were treated versus the people who burst into the Capitol building today were treated. And so as I've talked to players on the phone, I can hear in the background that they're watching the news, that they're taking this in. And I've heard that it's going to be difficult to take the basketball court. It's not something where they're considering not playing games later today, but this is very real. This threat on democracy that they are witnessing as American citizens is very real, and they're balancing that and playing later tonight.
Malika Andrews, Clippers, Warriors tonight. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Now we welcome in our very own insider, the ultimate insider, Adrian Wojnarowski from Bristol. Adrian, what's been the league's response to the events in D.C. today? What can you tell us?
Well, Stephen A. from the Players Association said, I talked to Michelle Roberts, their executive director. Now, she had not talked with the league at all today about postponing any of the games. We know, obviously, the Wizards are playing the Sixers tonight, but she was emotional today. She was certainly very angry, and the players she's talked to around the league and her colleagues, the double standard, especially coming on the heels of the findings with no charges against any of the police officers in Wisconsin in the Jacob Blake killing. That contrast was significant to Michelle Roberts, to those around the league. And, she said to me, she's sure happy that there are not going to be any people, black or brown people, who would head to the Capitol tonight to try to answer that MAGA crowd that stormed and rioted today, because she certainly believes, as do many others, that law enforcement reaction would be very different to that. And so this has been at the forefront of this fight of racial equity. It's certainly been at the forefront for the Players Association, the league, and certainly it was for the entire country today.
Thanks, Adrian. You'll be back shortly for more inside information. We'll be waiting for it. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Steve.
We now bring in the one and only Michael Wilbon. Listen, Mike, you were a columnist for the Washington Post from 1990 to 2010. You've been in that area writing for the paper for 30 years. You've been living there for over 40 years. I can't even imagine what it was like for you to see what you saw today. It's the only time I've ever seen this in my lifetime, and I'm sure the same can be said for you. Your thoughts?
Well, Stephen, you know how when you fly into Washington from most points west, you have that magnificent view of the Lincoln Memorial, the Washington Monument, and then the U.S. Capitol. And it's right there before you when you fly in and you see it, and it is majestic. And to have made that flight and that landing hundreds of times, and just to walk down Pennsylvania Avenue east toward the United States Capitol, and to think of it being breached, to see the pictures of it being breached, these are acts of domestic terrorism. And so we're seeing something today that I never imagined. I mean, it looks like some ridiculous apocalyptic movie that there seems to be one of every week, and you know that it's a ridiculous apocalyptic movie, and you dismiss it. But to see this, to see people breach the United States Capitol, it's just stunning. And to hear the news and follow it of someone being shot, for someone who's lived there, as you said, I moved there as an intern, and I've lived in Washington, all of my adult life. And this is just not something you expect to play out in the United States. You expect to see this. We see these pictures coming from a banana republic. We see them coming from somewhere around the world, and we sort of just brush it aside and say, we would never have that. And now we have that. For what? For objection to a free and fair election? And so this is this is not going away, Stephen A. This is not going away anytime soon, and we're going to all have to deal with this.
Well, it shouldn't go away, Mike Wilbon. And let me interject by saying it shouldn't go away at all. And let me interject by saying this. We saw players, the Russell Westbrooks of the world, the LeBron James of the world, the Jaylen Browns of the world, who's scheduled to have a game tonight against the Miami Heat, along with various others, Malcolm Brogdon, individuals who happen to be black, very, very successful. Athletes who conduct themselves like model citizens, and we see how they were labeled, and we only imagine how they would be treated. Doc Rivers spoke about that. Stan Van Gundy spoke about that. We saw Kevin Love allude to it as well. If black folks were on Capitol Hill and tried to engage with what looked to me to be an insurrection, as far as I'm concerned, that's how it looked to me. If black folks were on Capitol Hill conducting themselves in such a fashion that they got inside the Capitol, in the rotunda, one can only imagine what would happen for them. As we sit here and think about that, Mike Wilbon, and we think about the players and how conscientious they are, what do you expect to hear from them tonight? What do you hope to hear from them tonight, tomorrow, and in the days that follow about what we're witnessing and what we've witnessed today?
Well, we're going to hear outrage. I mean, we're talking about players that we saw all summer express, and not just players, officials, coaches, people in the industry, industry-wide, express outrage. And you need to hear that. We know what would have happened if those had been black and brown people, Stephen A. There would have been no breach into the United States Capitol, number one. And if there'd be anything close to it, you would have seen something more severe than water hoses and dogs. You'd have seen shooting. I mean, you would have. We saw what we saw in Lafayette Square, which is only about 2.5 miles away from the U.S. Capitol. We saw what we had there with the confrontation between police and peaceful objectors a few months ago back in the summer. So we know exactly what we would have seen. I just texted before we came on the air a couple of people who would know in this industry to ask them what they expect to happen. What is going to happen now? I think there are, 11 games tonight? The question is, what are we going to see when players sit and discuss with each other, as the rest of us are, their outrage, and how is that going to manifest?
Remember when we saw players and black folks protesting and everybody was near the White House, the president at that time alluded to how he had dogs, attack dogs waiting for folks. We forget that. We might remember that on a day like today. Appreciate you, Mike Wilbon. You'll be back with us shortly.